Throughout history there have been many game-changing moments. In early 49 BC, Julius Caesar famously crossed the Rubicon, ultimately becoming dictator of Rome for life. After 1803, Napoleon unleashed a series of wars across Europe, and in 1939 Adolf Hitler did the same. The most recent of these moments was undoubtedly the launching of Vladimir Putin's and Russia's so-called special operation in Ukraine. And, like the moments listed before, the 24th of February 2022 will be a date that lives in infamy. For now, coverage of the war is mostly focused on the day-to-day happenings, but here at GeoVane we want to give you the bigger picture. How could the war end? What will be its implications? Find out more in today's video. What if Russia wins in Ukraine? What if Ukraine drives Russia from its territory? These questions are beginning to swirl in the light of Russia's emerging new offensive, and their answers will impact every single person on the planet. So let's explore what the impact of each type of victory or even stalemate in Ukraine could mean for world geopolitics. Many people across the West are rejoicing. The Ukrainian military has pushed the Russian military back into Russia proper in the country's east, and is now mopping up isolated pockets of resistance on the Crimean Peninsula. An atmosphere of exhalation has swept the streets of Kyiv, and President Zelensky is set to give his victory speech. But what does this mean for Russia, the West, and most importantly the world? In the heads of many Western leaders and analysts, this is the sunlit uplands. Ukraine restores its territorial integrity, and the Russian armed forces are defeated for a period of time. The post-war international order is saved, and a process of attempted reconciliation between Russian Ukrainians and Ukrainians begins. From the perspective of NATO and especially the US, Western credibility is upheld and even fortified. Western arms shipments will likely be given a significant portion of the credit in bringing about a Ukrainian victory, bolstered by success in an intervention. Western cohesion and morale will be buoyed in the context of the dubious consequences of the Western withdrawal from Afghanistan. Nothing snowballs like success. In the event of a Ukrainian victory, expect the West to feel more empowered in international politics, with important implications for those countries, especially in the global south but also in Eastern Europe, where the West has vied with Russia and other rising powers for influence. For Russia, a defeat in Ukraine that can't be sold to the Russian public as a victory would have immediate and important political consequences. The position of Russian President Putin, who has made the revival of the glories of Russia his mission, would likely become untenable. A powerful successor could emerge quickly, unifying Russian state institutions and the Russian people around them. However, analysts have argued that such an individual would likely harbour similar nationalistic instincts. Any peace negotiated might likely be fragile. Alternatively, a lack of a powerful successor could see either the de jure or de facto breakup of the Russian state, either into independent fiefdoms owing ostensible allegiance to Moscow, but in reality run by local strongmen like Chechnya under Kadyrov, or even secession of the regions dominated by ethnic minorities, especially in the Central Asian and Far Eastern areas of Russia. However, the truth, as usual, is ever murky. Whether you see it as sad or not, the truth is that we may never see this scenario come to fruition. Many analysts suggest that were Ukraine to push into the territories Russia considers to be its own, then it risks a nuclear retaliation by Russia. Most analysts consider a stalemate, at least in the near term, likely. This scenario could easily occur if the renewed Russian effort is ground down on Ukrainian lines, or if Kyiv is unable to launch further successful counter-offensive operations like the one seen last year. Were a stalemate to occur, then the outcome of the uncompleted war would marginally favour the Russian side, turning into a forever war or frozen conflict. Russia has successfully used frozen conflicts in the past, such as those in Georgia, Moldova and Nagorno-Karabakh to pin neighbouring states into its sphere of influence. Moreover, we only have to look to recent events in Afghanistan to see how war weariness can influence Western nations. Were the war to drag on into a stalemate, it may well drop out of the headlines, and political and military support from and in the West could wane, allowing a reinvigorated Russian military to achieve its objectives in the future. Were economic and political instability to increase, this could happen sooner rather than later. Ukraine could also be faced with the prospect of a less friendly candidate in the White House following the 2024 election. Perhaps even more worryingly, a stalemate in Ukraine increases the chances of the war escalating beyond its borders. On the opposite end of the scale of Russo-Ukrainian war outcomes is a Russian victory. Were this to occur, any sense of jubilation in Moscow would be short-lived. First and foremost in the mind of Russian strategists would be the pacification of Ukraine, with guerrilla resistance most likely fierce and widespread. The complexities of a Russian occupation of Ukraine aside, how would a Russian victory translate into regional and global geopolitics? The first and immediate impact of a Russian victory in Ukraine on global geopolitics would be the question of whether or not other countries choose to follow its example. One only has to look to other parts of the world where the potential for kinetic conflict is held in check by the great cost in international standing of using force against other states. Were Russia to annex Ukraine's eastern regions and establish a Belarusian-style puppet government in Kyiv, then other states may choose to follow its example. For this, we can look to the most obvious cases of China and Taiwan, North Korea and South Korea, or less obvious cases such as Iran and Azerbaijan. These states could see Russian victory as the end of the so-called rules-based international order of the latter half of the 20th century. In this event, violent force could re-emerge as a means of carrying out international relations. Russian victory in Ukraine would no doubt rewrite the world's security architecture. Closer to home in Europe, Russia's presence in Ukraine could be a source of instability, most certainly being perceived as provocative and unacceptable by some of Ukraine's neighbours, who will view it as a threat to their own security. Many have speculated that Russia may not stop with Ukraine, arguing that it may go on to invade the Baltic countries and even Poland, though those of the opposing view argue that, given the Russian military's performance in Ukraine, this is unlikely. However, the biggest change would be on the global stage. Almost certainly Europe would find itself divided by a new Iron Curtain, with Belarus, Ukraine and Russia on one side, and the EU and NATO on the other. Extend this concept further and the rest of the Iron Curtain could extend further, through the Caucasus and either side of Turkey depending on how that country chooses to align itself, and along the Middle Eastern and North African Mediterranean coasts, depending on Russian and Chinese influence campaigns across Asia and Africa. There will also be major consequences for the West in general and the NATO alliance in particular. There will likely be much criticism of the US from European politicians, whose nations have borne the brunt of the consequences of sanctions on Russia. We would likely see the resurgence of narratives that the US ended up enriching itself on the backs of European contributions. More generally, however, the influence of the West would likely see a sharp decline, as other countries, especially those in the global south, see that they have been found wanting in the ultimate test of international politics. Though Russia itself faces other challenges which make renewed global ascendance unlikely, other rising powers such as China will likely find a much more permissive international environment that allows them to pursue their international ambitions much more openly and forcefully. These are the few major ways the Russia-Ukraine war could develop, and what GeoVane thinks are the major geopolitical implications for each scenario. We'll be keeping our eyes peeled for developments on the battlefield, and we'll continue to bring you timely analysis, so don't forget to like, share and subscribe. But in the meantime, do you agree, disagree? Let us know down below.